Good afternoon in Africa, good morning in the United States, and welcome to the third of our Africa-US forums for 2024. Today, Africa and the Diaspora. These monthly forums feature speakers from around the African continent and here in Washington, D.C. This forum is on the record and is being recorded and is being videoed by Voice of America. Video of this Zoom recording will be available on demand later on the USC Africa US website. The link is already in chat. You can also find videos of all of our previous forums and a schedule of all of the forums for this calendar year. Our next forum will be Monday, April 22nd, the same time, and the topic will be freedom of expression around Africa with experts from around the continent and a speaker or two here in Washington, D.C. These forums are presented by, in alphabetical order, the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. We'll be hearing shortly from Bob Wekesa, the director. The Annenberg Center for Communication, Leadership, and Policy at the University of Southern California. It's represented here by Judy Kang and me. The Center for African Studies at Howard University, and the director, Krista Johnson, will be speaking shortly. The Institute for African Studies at George Washington University. I see a few people logged in on Zoom from GW. And the Public Diplomacy Council of America. And again, I see some people from PDCA logged in. Today, as always, we have speakers from Africa, from the US, one who flew from Africa to the US on Saturday over the weekend to be with us. We welcome Vice Chancellor Miles Davis from Wigwe University in Nigeria. He'll be speaking shortly. All of you here in Washington have speaker bios, and we will be putting into chat links to each of the speakers as they speak. But we begin, as always, with the person who has done so much to organize and build this program and this series, our inaugural Africa Fellow, Bob Wekesa, the director of the African Center for the Study of the United States, joining us from South Africa. So good afternoon, Bob.
Good morning, Adam. And pleasure, having me here. And thanks very much, participants in person and virtual. My introductory remarks will be short so that we provide as much time and space for our panelists to help unpack this ever-evolving topic of African diaspora. And mine is just to say that this initiative, the Africa-US Universities Network Initiative, started in December 2022 as a sideline event of the US-Africa Leaders Summit. And since then, we've sustained the monthly events, tackling various topics. Think of, in fact, just last month, we handled the topic of Africa's engagement with global powers. And as my colleague Adam has mentioned, next month we'll be moving on to matters of press freedom. And we've handled topics to do with climate change, with digital economy and digital governance, all these very cutting edge issues. Today we handle the issue of diaspora, which, as I mentioned, is an ever-evolving issue and topic from all directions. I'll just give you a snippet, which my colleague will be speaking to. Now we are seeing a flood almost of African Americans migrating to the continent. And at the same time, we are seeing many Africans heading the other way towards the US, across the US. This is a concept I and Professor Krista Johnson have referred to as the old and new diaspora. And in between the migrations and immigrations from the continent to the US and from the US to the continent, and in fact, to the so-called global Africa, which will include Africa's migration or Africans migrating and living in Europe, in the Caribbean, in Asia, and so forth. This is a very fascinating topic. And we thought that putting together this event will help us unpack it. But more importantly, this initiative itself has now been in existence for over 14 months. In recent discussions with colleagues whom Adam mentioned, we are thinking of formalizing and institutionalizing the initiative because it has operated on a more or less loose basis. And I think we want to move towards institutionalization of the Africa-US Universities Network so that it permits us some resources, some order, some structure in terms of particularly knowledge production that is relevant to policymakers as well as to academia. But let me not bore you too much with what we plan to do or what we've done. I think it's my singular honor to invite our first speaker, Vice Chancellor Davis Miles, who is a distinguished professor with a track record, both academic and leadership, of over 30 years. He's a professor of management, entrepreneurship, and business, and he is the pioneer Vice Chancellor of Wigwe University in Nigeria, which I believe we shall be hearing about today. Before that, he served as president of Linfield University and has been involved in various good causes, such as being a leadership fellow in the Society of Leadership Fellows in the UK, as well as being executive mentor of the Global Food Fund. And I could go on and on. He has an extensive CV, as you can imagine, but I think it will only be wise and better to hand over the mic to him. Welcome, Professor Miles.
Thank you. And I'm humbled, and I feel as if I first must apologize for those in attendance who saw the name Miles Davis and expect me to show up for trumpet. Sorry, I do not mean to disappoint you. But I want to share with you our perspective. The transatlantic slave trade was a horrible thing. It was horrific to be sold into slavery. It was more horrific to be subjected to the horrific conditions of ships crossing the Atlantic. It was horrific as people tried to break people's will and often brand their bodies to serve the capitalist needs of the diaspora that people were transported to. But people hear that and they think about history. So I'm not going to talk about history because there's something that's more important. Because the most powerful weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. The most destructive thing that was done to us was to separate us from our roots. Because any farmer will tell you, anybody who has spent time in nature will tell you that a tree without firmly planted roots is easily blown over in the wind. So I'm going to spend time taking you through, in the short time that I have, a thought exercise for you. You see, there are 170 million, give or take a few thousand, Blacks that are part of the diaspora. Of that number, 40 million live in the US. Now I'm going to contrast that with another number. And I want you to hear me clearly because my contrast is for illustrative purposes only. It is not to advocate against or for anyone. I'm going to try to get to a point in the short period of time that I have. There are 14.6 million people who identify as Jews in the world. Of that 14.6 million, 6.2 million live in Israel. 5.7 live in the US. Now, I want you to remember those numbers. 14.6 million versus 170 million. And that there are 40 million people of Black descent in the US. And there are 5.7 million people who identify as Jews in the US. Just remember those numbers. Now, I have to ask your patience with me because I'm a bit of a data geek. But I think most of life comes down to math and science. So stay with me for a second. It is projected by the year 2030 that Black Americans will have $1.7 trillion in purchasing power in the US. I'm not even talking about the number that are in Latin America and Brazil. I'm talking about in the US alone. Why is it that Israel was able to emerge as an economic and even a military force in this region? It's because people from their diaspora were committed to its survival. Stay with me, I'm not arguing politics here, I'm talking economics. People were committed to its survival. Now remember, I also said that there were $1.7 trillion in purchasing power among Black Americans. The entire economy, the GDP of the African continent is $3 trillion. That's the entire continent. The two largest economies are in sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm gonna start with the two that are not in sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm looking at my friend, Mr. Yunus over here. The other is Egypt and Algeria. Those are the two that are not. They're number 3 and number 4. Number 1 is South Africa. And number 2 is my beloved adopted homeland of Nigeria. So I'm looking at these numbers and I'm saying, what if people from the diaspora took a percentage and invested? Now, let me be clear. I'm not talking about trying to sell Africa something. I'm talking about invested in the survival of the country. You may say, well, Africa's a big continent. I don't know where I come from. I don't know where to start. Well, do what I did. I did a DNA test. I'm primarily from Nigeria. Part of why I'm there. You can find this information out. You don't have, there's 53 countries in Africa, so you don't have to decide to invest in all of them, but you can decide where to invest. And if people took and invested, I'm looking at my dear friend, Dr. Brenda over there, who decided that when she wanted to build a home out of this country, she decided to build a home in Cabo Verde. You don't have to run off to Italy, because they often don't want you anyway. You're coming from a place that underestimates you, undervalue, and marginalize you. Why are you investing in your money? Why is it that with this purchasing power, Blacks still tend to be represented in the financial scale in this country? The reason that we have not accumulated wealth within this country is because it doesn't want it. If you wonder what I'm talking about, just look at the history. I'm not making this stuff up. My beloved Navy Federal Credit Union, for those who wonder, I served in the US military. They just released a data report that the same financial picture, Blacks get approved at loans at 50%, while whites get approved at 75%. Let me be clear. Do not hear me saying that I dislike anyone. I'm just giving you facts and figures. And since I went to one of those great schools where they taught Latin, res ispis liquidor, the facts speak for themselves. I'm saying that imagine what could happen if you took all that you have, all that you know, the separation that has occurred, and reunited that, decided to invest back in your country that you came from. What is the possibility? Don't tell me about the corruption that goes on in Nigeria, because I'm going to ask you, are you not paying attention to what's happening here? Don't talk to me about the problems that are happening there, because problems exist here. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I want you to be clear that we possess the tools to make a difference. If you want to help Egypt, help Egypt. If you want to help South Africa, help South Africa. If you want to help Cabo Verde, help Cabo Verde. But don't do it from a patronizing perspective. Do it from an investment perspective. Nigeria, where Wigwe University is located, is a young country. It's a young country, both actually and proverbially. I didn't realize that most people didn't know that Nigeria did not come into existence as a country until 1960. I didn't realize that most people didn't know that. And then, of course, it lost 3 years to a civil war with the Biafra War, horrible war. And you say, and then people say, oh my God, look how horrible Africa is. Wait a minute, didn't we fight a civil war in this country? Some think we're still fighting a civil war. Talk to some of my friends in Virginia. They talk about the war in northern aggression. I'm saying there are stages of development. Mr. Davis, there are stages of development. And it is only when you decide that you're going to make a difference and invest, because it is the middle class. It is the middle class that actually makes a difference in any society. The wealthy are going to be wealthy no matter where they are. I can't tell you what I've seen in wealth being in Nigeria. Can't even, it's no comparison. No comparison. And the poor are going to be the poor everywhere. The cities that I see with tin roofs or on stilts and villages and everything that exist look a little bit different from some of the tent cities that I saw when I lived in Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. I'm saying it's the middle class. It's those who start and launch businesses that demand the rule of law, that demand the infrastructure to make things happen. That's why your investment is needed. That's why we launched Wigwe University. We didn't launch Wigwe University in Nigeria to become the institution that helps unleash the prosperity in Africa, to produce people to get jobs. Because people have jobs. They're not making enough money to achieve a sustainable life there, but that happens here too. We're looking at people to become leaders, because when you see poor leadership anywhere in the world, you see miseducation, where people don't care about their people. They care more about themselves. You don't have to look to Africa to see people running for leadership positions that are more concerned about themselves than they are for their country. Let somebody say amen to that. I'm saying, and wrapping up, I'm hoping that what we come to understand is Africa needs you. And you need Africa. 64% of the population in Nigeria is under 25 years old. 52% is under 19. It's a young country. Average life expectancy is 52 years old. Continues to go up. That's up from when it was 44 years old. Africa needs you. 1 in 4 people will be from the African continent. Africa needs you. There are opportunities for investment. There are opportunities for education. Why do those who identify as Jews send their children to live on kibbutz in Israel to establish a sense of identity that they can't get from being in the US? Would you consider sending your child to Wigwe University in Nigeria? There's some wonderful institutions in South Africa that rank high in the world. Would you consider sending your child there? HBCUs, my dear friends here from Howard University, who are begging the government to give them money. Africa is the original HBCU. I'm saying that we have to free our minds. We have to decolonize our minds so that we can bridge that gap and reach out and build so that you can be seen, you can see something that you're proud of looking back at. I was having a wonderful conversation with my new friend, Miss Judy, this morning. We were talking about her soul journey from South Korea. I've lived long enough to know when South Korea was seen as a throwaway country. And then it changed. An economic powerhouse. Africa needs you. And so, given that my time is up, I want to be sensitive to that. I want to say this to you because I think it's important for me to say this to you. I don't mean to offend anyone. I have to speak my truth. I don't mean ill will towards anyone. I don't say what I say out of any sort of hatred or dislike of anyone. I just love my people. Now, we can argue that everyone's my people, and I support that. But I also care about the least of these. The most in need right now are people who look like me. I want to make a difference in that world. And I understand that love is transformative. Love endures. Love, in the words of a songwriter, make you get up early or make you stay up all night long. Love is what we need. But you cannot truly love anyone else until you first learn to love yourself. Thank you for allowing me time to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor, for framing what we should be discussing today and much more. I want to recognize Jennifer Cook, who is the head of the Institute for African Studies at George Washington University, one of our partners. She has joined us by video. Welcome, Jennifer. And our next speaker, also one of our partners, is Krista Johnson. Professor Johnson is the director of the Center for African Studies at Howard University. So Krista Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adam, and colleagues who are there in Washington, D.C. I'm usually there, but this time I had to travel, so I'm joining you remotely. I look forward to this conversation, and Vice Chancellor Davis, I think, got us off to a good start, but he actually got me thinking about different things that I haven't put on in my presentation. So I think I will also just quickly go through my presentation, because as these events oftentimes are, the fruitful engagement really comes with engaging with the audience, and so I hope to kind of quickly be able to get to that. So my focus, I think, is a little bit different from Professor Davis's, in that I'm a political scientist by training, so I think I'm going to focus largely on not necessarily just the political kind of solidarities or engagements between Africa and the diaspora, but I think focus more on that. But I have a lot to say on, I think, some of these economic engagements as well. So let me just start by saying, as I was kind of preparing remarks, I thought that, well, what first came to my mind was really, I think, the fruitful conversations that we had around African agency last month, and then even in different forum, which really, I think, outlined, I think, some important areas for the continents to really show leadership and agency. One of them also, just came up last week on Howard's campus when we invited South African Minister Naledi Pandor to come and speak on campus. And there she emphasized, which has been emphasized in one of our in our past sessions as well, the importance of strengthening multilateral institutions and really democratic governance at the international level. And Pandor talked about the African continent, or certainly South Africa's support of the United Nations as a system, not wanting to necessarily change that, but really reform it so that it actually addresses, the majority of the world's population and not just a minority. In our conversations in previous months, we talked about the pivotal role that will be played by the Africa Free Continental Trade area or agreement, and just the importance of really, supporting this idea of building a common and integrated market. And with that, really the importance of technology transfer, especially, in terms of thinking about the partnership roles between Western countries or developed countries and African countries. And I think some of these very much speak to, as I said, Professor Davis gave us the kind of the larger bird's eye view, but a lot of this hinges on, of course, well, what are going to be those kind of economic engagements? So thinking through that is important. The other point that I would just say in terms of African agency is, you see this with regards to, in the conversations have touched on, the importance for African agency in the area of just energy transition, and then climate change, even just kind of, perhaps interconnected with that. So Minister Pandor last week was talking about the JET-P partnership that South Africa has, but we know, to achieve the aspirations that Professor Davis was talking about in terms of, just tremendous, just achieving the potential of economic development that the African continent has, that's going to require leadership and African agency in the area of energy and climate change, et cetera. So I just kind of put those on the table in terms of what are the kind of the broader goals, and then thinking about how do we build African and diasporan solidarities that support African agency. So, the dynamics of diaspora engagement with their communities on the continent, with countries, with regions of origin, are certainly varied and complex, right? There are multi-layered and overlapping flows of linkages for diasporas. And these include 6 particularly critical flows. We have demographic, cultural, economic, political, ideological, and iconographic. And needless to say, mapping these flows onto the geographical and historical dimensions of the African diasporas, even in the United States, and certainly those around the world, becomes an exceedingly challenging task. One of the things that has oftentimes been, or one of the kind of these solidarities or engagements that has oftentimes been cited for a while now, has been the issue of remittances. As we know, just to give you again some of the statistics, in 2018, the officially recorded remittances were worth $46 billion in sub-Saharan Africa, which was far more. So these are remittances to the continent, was $46 billion. And this far exceeded foreign direct investments of that year, which was only $32 billion. So kind of speaking to Professor Davis's point in terms of the kind of spending potential or buying potential of the diaspora, we already know is quite significant. And in fact, a lot of money does get remitted there, but that's of course tends to be on a family and individual basis. There's also, just in terms of kind of thinking, taking a few steps back to think about the kinds of engagements that already exist or have existed for a number of years or even decades. It's important to, I think, for us in this conversation to revisit the African Union and its creation of the African diaspora as a 6th region. This kind of Region 6 as kind of a formal state, if you will, within the African Union, really was solidified in 2018, when you had the State of the African Diaspora. So looking specifically in particular at the diaspora in the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean in particular. But there's a lot of, I mean, as many can attest to, while this has been kind of something on paper, not just on paper, in fact, there have been, individuals and people who have been appointed or elected to, serve in different roles and positions within this state of the African diaspora. But I think what we're seeing now, or at least I feel what we're seeing now, is that that's kind of, we have multiple tracks in which the kind of Africa diaspora engagement are playing themselves out. And oftentimes these tracks do not necessarily overlap, or there's not certainly, kind of collaboration or coordination among these. So thinking, I think, through what do we see as the role of the sixth region within the AU, and is that an entity or a mechanism through which the diaspora can more effectively engage with the continent, and then vice versa, I think is something for discussion here. Let me also just backtrack and give a little bit more context from what Professor Davis gave. In terms of the changing demographics here in the United States, particularly within the Black American community. So most people probably, and I know we have an international audience certainly online, so I want to make sure everyone there is aware that the percentage of African immigrants as constituted in the Black American community has increased dramatically, really, over the past decades. And now they constitute about 11% of the Black people living in the United States. And that's up from just 3% in 1980. And there are projected numbers that trend is going to only increase. And by 2026, you'll probably have close to 25% of the Black population in the United States that are new African immigrants. And that doesn't even really take into consideration that generation of new diaspora, if you will, who were born in the United States, but whose parents immigrated from African countries. So the changing demographics in the United States, I think, is important context, kind of for the conversation that we're having here. But equally important is an understanding of domestic politics, right? So historically, the African diaspora in the United States didn't really engage in domestic politics. They weren't kind of a political force, unlike the Jewish diaspora, for example, that Professor Davis talked about, right? So, but I think what's really fascinating over the past, again, maybe decade or so, is you're seeing this growing political maturity of the African diaspora here in the United States. So whereas historically, African immigrant communities tended not to align themselves very easily with, say, the homegrown African-American population, in part because, of course, that homegrown African-American population has been severely oppressed, has been severely marginalized, and has been severely kind of, demonized, right, in the eyes of many of the population. So that wasn't a kind of an alliance that new African immigrants were interested in solidifying. But we've seen a real kind of shift in that with the Black Lives Matter movement and the George Floyd murder. We've seen a real shift in that, and we've seen a real kind of intra-racial alliance in important respects. Not that it's all, love and getting along kumbaya. There's a lot of differences and a lot of diversities that need to be managed within that alliance or within that community or population. But there certainly have been opportunities to forge those kinds of alliances. So as I said before, what's really striking to me is to understand and to really kind of reflect on this political maturity of the African diaspora. And you see this probably most visibly, or most people are aware of the President Biden's announcement of this new Presidential Advisory Commission on African Diaspora and Engagement, which was formed after the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. And that's probably one of the more visible ways in which we're seeing really this kind of mobilizing of the African diaspora community as really a tool of soft power for the U.S. administration. But then that also, of course, holds opportunities for the diaspora to utilize those fora for its own ends. But we're also seeing this at other levels of government as well. In Maryland, where I live, the Governor Wes Moore just announced a new Maryland African Affairs Commission, right, that he himself has put together of African diaspora and leading individuals within the states. And that commission is intended to play an advisory role, but also a kind of a galvanizing and a forum really for African diaspora and African American communities to kind of congeal and to hopefully maybe develop some common interests that can be worked towards. But at the same time, we see the congressional bill, for example, in Congress, which is trying to ostracize South Africa and U.S.-South Africa relations, or certainly critique South Africa and U.S.-South Africa relations. And that bill was actually introduced by a Black Republican, John James. So you see opportunities for the African diaspora community collectively to support African initiatives and African agency, but then there are also certainly examples of the ways in which that gets undermined. I would say just as well, and I'm going to get to a couple of just kind of big points, but I would say as well, it's important to note that outside of Ghana, people are probably aware, the Ghanaian government has a diaspora affairs office in the office of the president. And, I think it's important to maybe debate and discuss, is that a model that can be and that should be perhaps, utilized or multiplied by other African countries? One of the ways in which the Ghanaian government has been able to utilize that office very effectively has been for it to capitalize on the campaign of the Year of the Return, right? That was both, to Professor Davis's point, that was both an investment opportunity for Ghana, right, to kind of draw investment from the diaspora, but it was also a kind of a cultural and awareness opportunity to make people aware of Ghanaian culture and West African culture and society, and kind of rekindle those ties and those connections with the diaspora. So I think what is needed, and this is a challenge, right? What is needed is a united diaspora. What we see, I could go on and on about all of the numerous Liberian American associations that are being forged, not only in the DMV area, but throughout the country. Sierra Leone and Nigerian, not even just Nigerian American, but we're of course down to Igbo American and, Yoruba American. So we see all kinds of, entities emerging that are representing various interests, aligned with interests on the continent. So I think the challenge for us now is to really kind of think about how we forge a united diaspora, or at least, and it's not going to be, of course, we have disparate interests. So that's not going to, be, there's not going to be one unified voice, but I think thinking strategically about how we might come together on at least several issues and then be able to present them or move forward in a unified voice. We did that, of course, with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. We've done that with other initiatives on the continent. So thinking strategically about the ways in which we can do that. I would also just highlight, and I know I'm running out of time too, I would highlight as well that this is where I think, it would be foolhardy to kind of make this, to make a separation between the old diaspora, if you will, and the new diaspora, because the old diaspora, I think, has a lot to teach this new diaspora in terms of understanding and maneuvering within the kind of interest group politics that exists within the United States, because they've been more adept at doing that just for a longer period of time. Let me also just say, I think we African states, and the African states in particular, have not capitalized on subnational diplomacy to the extent that they could. And that, in fact, is where you see really more political prominence of the African diaspora. So the sister cities initiatives that Access and others are doing, I think are important, because as I showed, even at the state level, that's where you have these African Affairs commissions. In the DC area, we have the DC Office on African Affairs. So those kinds of entrees into the American system, into the American political system, are important for African governments and regions and entities to be aware of, but also thinking about how it is that they can capitalize on building those relationships at that level, at the subnational level. I would also just highlight, and I can't say too much about this, but the role of HBCUs, right? I mean, this came up again, higher education, I think, has a really significant role to play here, but particularly HBCUs. We're seeing a tremendous change and transformation on Howard's campus alone. I can just speak to Howard's experience, but which it really bodes well for, I think, developing these strong connections and really partnerships between the diaspora and African partners. I won't go into all of the Howard initiatives that we do that I think that would support that. But, the AU recently announced that they want to train over 100,000 postgraduate researchers, African researchers, in the next, I think, decade or so, or a couple of decades, part of its kind of 2063, agenda. HBCUs, higher education more broadly, but HBCUs, I think, will be critical in terms of building those relationships and supporting that agenda, and really making sure that that African governments and bodies are able to meet that. I'm going to stop there so that we can have more time for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista Johnson, the director of the Center for African Studies at Howard University, I'm looking at the screen. We are standing by for at least one more speaker from Africa. I don't see him yet. So let's continue. Professor Johnson just mentioned the subnational initiative through the diaspora, mentioning Maryland, District of Columbia. One person who is now a mayor, former member of Congress, Karen Bass, mayor of Los Angeles, is very much committed to ties with Africa. So let's go now to Los Angeles, where it is still very early in the morning. And our next speaker is Ernest Wilson, former dean of the USC Annenberg School. He is now he's a professor, and he is the founder and director of the Center for Third Space Thinking, and much more. So, Ernie, thank you for getting up very early in the morning there in California. The floor is yours. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Adam, for inviting me. This is, I've really enjoyed the presentation so far, and I'm going to build on what Dr. Johnson said in talking about agency. And I will point on, yes, the sun is just beginning to rise here in California, but I see it's already light there in my old hometown of Washington, D.C. And so what I would like to do is to talk a little bit about the history of agency that Professor Johnson talked about. I love the way she set out a future agenda, which I think is very important. And the future agenda is going to be based on what people in the diaspora have done prior to today. And I want to underscore her recognition of the African diaspora's engagement in political affairs over the past couple of decades, which has been hugely important. And as interesting and important is the mobilization on the continent of others who are also interested in the diaspora. And that, of course, is the subject of the conversation today. I will say that I think I see Dr. Joe Opaku who is there with us today, who is a real leader in the interaction between the African diaspora and the continent, especially Nigeria. So good morning, Joe. It's good to see you again. Okay, so here's what I want to do. Dr. Johnson talked about the various channels that are available to us to try to exercise the kind of political power that other diasporas enjoy, whether it's the Greeks, it's the Italians, it's the Jews, it's other groups, ethnic groups, who have mobilized politically to achieve their goals. And what I would like to, I'm going to walk through about 6 or 7, very briefly, 6 or 7 channels that the diaspora has employed to enhance trade with Africa, to cut back on the relationship between the white South African regime and the Black people of South Africa. So there are a number of examples. So this is going to be a quick history of what has been done in the United States, in the African diaspora toward the continent. Now, I should confess and brag here a little bit, because as Dr. Johnson said, she didn't get enough time to talk about Howard University, but I am going to talk about Howard because I was born on Howard University's campus and grew up there, right where the main library is, because my father was involved with African students at Howard University. He was the first dean of international affairs at Howard University. So I'm going to speak from personal experience, having grown up and seeing the diaspora emerge, especially in Washington, D.C., among the students who were at Howard University, and also when the first ambassadors came to the United States from Africa, and who established themselves in the Washington area. So the first category of agency and mobilization that I want to point to is political grassroots programs. Some of you probably remember Trans-Africa, which was created in 1976 by Randall Robinson, who had been working with one of the Black congressmen who was very active in Africa, really the godfather of African American relations in politics, and that was Congressman Diggs from Detroit, who helped to found this organization called Trans-Africa, which mobilized African Americans across the country, starting in 1976. He worked in, that organization worked in Boston, in Washington, in Chicago. There were also political mobilizations in the Bay Area around that time, in a number of organizations, especially working with South Africa. And so in the Bay Area, there were struggles around Zimbabwe, and African Americans worked with African organizations like ZANU in Zimbabwe, the ANC, Frelimo, who would work, and we worked with Mozambique and Angola. I remember working in South Africa personally with some of those groups, including the Black Panther organization. The Communist Party was very interested in Southern African struggles because of the labor movements in the Bay Area, and so forth. And so these kinds of models, political activities, demonstrate that there is a history of collaboration, close collaboration between Africans in the New World and Africans in Africa. One of the leaders in that movement is a woman named Gay McDougall, who was very active in Trans-Africa and became one of the advisors to Nelson Mandela. In fact, the photograph of Nelson Mandela voting in South Africa has Gay McDougall standing right next to the president as he was casting his vote. Moving on to cultural religious engagement, the African American church was very interested in Africa in the 1800s and into the 1900s, and created a pipeline back and forth between those two areas. I was lucky enough to live in the Congo for a while as a missionary, mostly because that was the only way I could get into the Congo to do voluntary work in that part of the world. Many of my friends were surprised that I was ever a missionary. I think it seems hard for them to believe, but we have to do what we have to do where we have to do it. But the main denominations sent missionaries again and again and again to Southern Africa, to West Africa, and that provides us a model, in a sense, of what we could do in interacting with our brothers and sisters on the continent in these movements. Let me also mention a gentleman who created a private sector USAID, a man named C. Payne Lucas, who developed something called Africare. And he created this organization and rooted it in the African American community in Washington because he felt that the assistance that the US government was giving to Africa was too paternalistic and too, frankly, from his perspective, too white oriented. And he wanted to create an institution that was African and African American oriented. And so he formed a new organization to do that. Black professional organizations in the Association of Black Lawyers and healthcare officials, they were also engaged between the United States and Africa, and continue to be. There was a man a number of people, I'll just mention the other congressmen who were involved and brought in to promote African American relations in the Congressional Black Caucus. Adam Clayton Powell, the first, was one of those people who provided political power in the Congress. And that's one thing I want to emphasize, which is that the work that we have done over the years, whether at Howard University or Harvard University or Berkeley, has been done to mobilize our communities to put pressure on the US Congress, pressure on the White House, pressure on formal governmental organizations like the USTR, United States Trade Representative's Office. And so I kind of want to convey that we have had great successes in moving forward the African agenda. And as we become more mobilized on this side of the water and on that side of the water, then we can continue that. I'll close by saying that one of the groups that did that were academics. I'll put on my professor hat here and remind us that there was something called the African Studies Association, which was dominated largely by white academics. And then in the early 70s, along with other Pan-African movements in the United States, there was created the African Heritage Studies Association, which was formed by Black academics at HBCUs and other schools, but especially HBCUs, who wanted to have their own platform to demonstrate their own voice, to demonstrate their own priorities as Black people in the diaspora. So I want to just encourage us to continue that by working through these 6 or 7 channels that Dr. Johnson also talked about, because when we do that, we do better over here in mobilizing politics and also working in Africa. So thank you very much, Adam, and to your group, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Professor Wilson, for that tour de force. You really kind of, in only a few minutes, helped wrap up a vast history overarching a long period of time. And also for giving us the framework, as scholars, as intellectuals, through which we can contemplate, research, analyze these issues.
Thank you, sir.
I particularly like the idea of agency through phases of time, and I believe as scholars we can follow that and in an agential manner keep moving the script. And I think for now we'll now move to our next speaker, who is Mr. Simmonds, who is a thought leader, in fact, and a public intellectual. Who will then give us his perspective on the topic. Without further ado, over to you, Ni. And I just want to also mention quickly that we've been hit by load shedding, blackout here. And so if for some reason I disappear, it's because we don't have power. I guess you saw my screen go blank. Thank you very much.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Bob. Oh, wow, intellectual, okay. I want to thank USC for inviting me again to speak about this important subject. Diaspora engagement is not only important, it's a pillar of strength for any country that's developing or developed, right? And as a continent, as African continent changes, evolves, it's very, very important countries not only embrace their diasporas, they are engaging them on an ongoing basis. And one is not just engaging their diaspora just for financial or when they're set here return. It's an ongoing engagement, right? And what does that mean? That means that your embassies and consulates have to be engaged on an ongoing basis. And I'll talk about that. If you're an African country, you have an overseas consulate or embassy, and your citizens or your diaspora is only going there to get a visa or update their passport. That is it's an unused it's an unused treasure, right? And your embassies and consulates are a extension of your brand identity. Let's be very, very honest, right? So I'll go into further detail about that. But the demographics are quite alarming. There's also opportunity. The continent right now is about 1.5 billion people. There are about 5 countries that will double in size. Yeah. Nigeria's going to double. DRC's going to double. Egypt's going to double. Kenya's going to double. The list goes on. And with this doubling, what does that mean for food security, climate change, baseload power? Bob just mentioned that you might have to get out the home because of ESCOM has ESCOM has had this challenge for years. So, not only do we have to feed ourselves, we have to make sure that we have enough electrification, that we have enough jobs for all these youth. We can't have young women and men, and I said women. Everybody says men first. I'm gonna say women. I'm gender. I'm about gender equality. So we can't have women and men, young women and men, walking around with nothing to do. That's a cause of, as a recipe of disaster, right? Even if we have to have some sort of African version of a Peace Corps, so they're doing something or giving back. You can't have an idle mind at waste, right? So that's something that we have to find a way to mitigate and solve. In 20 years, some say that the continent will double or will increase to 2.5 billion people. That's alarming, right? So what do you do if you're head of state and you are dealing with this demographic population, and you have you're digitizing and you're trying to get to the point where you're supporting this new growth, and you don't know what to do about it? Well, your diaspora's there, right? Everybody talks about after the African Free Trade Agreement. It's having some going through its growing pains, but it'll get there. I think it's a first good step. I think there needs to sort of be some, a mechanism for rules of not conformity. If you're not conforming, what is the penalty? So you can just have a trade agreement and then it's there. Nobody's really doing it. I mean, my country, my parents are from Ghana. I just understand that Ghana just allows some visa-free access. I thought the ACTA was allowed flow of people. If you're, just like the EU, we're trying to mimic other countries or other regions. We should allow free movement. I don't know why this hasn't happened. But those demographics are desolated groundwork or something that it's real. It's not going away, but it's something that we need to solve. Can the diaspora be a partner in that? How do we utilize all of us with backgrounds? You said it well, Dr. Davis. There are all these people in the diaspora who are sitting here in African needs. I wouldn't go above and beyond and say, not only do we need those talents, we need to identify who has experience and training, the skill set. Morocco had a devastating earthquake last year. Do they know when their global diaspora have backgrounds in civil engineering, disaster response, supply chain, so that they can help with the post-recovery of the Moroccan, this devastating Moroccan earthquake? I hear that it was in the mountains, it wasn't near Marrakesh or some of the other urban areas. Libya had a devastating flooding with its with some man-made challenges, and it flooded some areas. Does the Libyan government know who is in there? Well, they don't have a government right now. They're trying to solve that as we speak. But these are things that we have to ask ourselves, right? I don't want to, there are a lot of. I'm a business person. I've done a lot of. I've held hands with early stage entrepreneurs, and for every challenge in Africa, there's also an opportunity, right? There are a lot of challenges on the continent, but there's also a lot of opportunity. And I think what you're going to see in the next, you're seeing it now. There's this term unicorn. That's term is a company that's an early stage company that has a market cap of $1 billion. A couple of them, but going forward, you're going to see more of these unicorns. Entrepreneurs, innovators, scientists who have taken a risk opportunity in a startup that's trying to solve a local challenge that can expand to other countries in the region. I would actually say some of these unicorns are going to be cross-continental. Once we see an African company go to Latin America or South Asia or Southeast Asia, that's when you know that, hey, this can be a Pan-African company, right? And I'm not talking about Donate, I'm talking about early stage startups who are disrupting traditional businesses and are making inroads, are going to create jobs. Those are the types of things that I like to support. I know the whole diaspora engagement. I think the top 3 countries outside of Africa that I like to talk about, we've done a really good job to engage your diasporas in an ongoing way, and are, to me, they're pillars of they're the North Star of diaspora engagement. Are Ireland, Israel, and India. In the early 19th century, Ellis Island when all these migrants came in from Italy and Central Europe and Ireland. The Irish were unfortunately the second-class citizens, right? You watch any mobster movie, you see that Irish were unfortunately were the ones that were doing the back office stuff. They're ones that were collecting the bribes from the Italian mobsters. They were always in the background, as we say, in the cut, right? Yeah, right. But the Irish diaspora, if you look at Ireland now and what they've become, you have Dell Computers there, you have all these technology corporations that have set up shop there. And why? Because they use the Irish diaspora, the American Irish who are in Boston, Chicago, Milwaukee, to petition or to encourage their companies to say, set up shop here. There's Irish has a special tax-free zone to set up shop. But that's gone away because of the EU tax code has now. There's a level playing field, but Ireland took advantage of this for years. So it's what Ireland has done is a great thing. And Israel, I don't want to talk about Israel. I mean, that you talked about, others have talked about it. But I think for Africa, at least for most of the continent, I think the country that we can really talk about that we can relate to is India, right? Half of Africa speaks English. India speaks English. You'll get at top 20 tech companies now in the US. You have Microsoft, I forgot the Satya Nadella, Alphabet, which owns Google, Micron, Adobe. These are top companies that the Indian at the helm. How was India able to do this within 2 generations, right? When COVID wreaked its ugly head and everybody was sequestered at home, we all now know that India is the #1 producer of vaccines. How has the Indian government been able to turn overnight? Now, remember, during the 50s and 60s, India couldn't feed itself. It went through a green revolution. Look at India today. Not only are they a powerhouse, they are a military powerhouse, they are an economic powerhouse. And they have their own version of MIT called IITs. And some of these guys who couldn't go to IIT said come to school at Oxford or Harvard because that's a backup. But over time, a lot of these Indians came back to India, right? So I think we can, the African continent can emulate what India has done. We can't mimic it one-on-one because India is one big country, different states. And not all Indians are happy. Everybody's happy with Modi and who's from Gujarat, who's in Delhi right now. But I would say there's some things that we can look at India to say, well, why can we do that in Africa? Or how do we, look at that or emulate what India has done? In Africa, I would say the 2 countries, and I'm not, somebody says, oh, what about my country? I'm just going through my experiences when I was at the World Bank. I created the World Bank's Diaspora Engagement Program. And I think Rwanda and Ethiopia have done a really great job to engage your diasporas. Rwanda, landlocked country, look at all the American tech companies and companies that set up shop there. Why is that? It's because of, give credit to Kagame. He's not a saint by any means, but give him credit and other Rwandans who have done a good job to bring on in all these entities. Last but not least, Ethiopia. I don't know why we're not using this Ethiopia example, but if you're going to develop as a country, industrial-wise, you need baseload electricity. You need electrons flowing. And this Grand Renaissance Dam, even though Egypt doesn't like it, Ethiopia needs it. Ethiopia needs they need baseload power, and that Grand Renaissance Dam was developed by the power of Ethiopia. The Habesha diaspora supported, and even though it was some kind of a bond. If you talk to most Ethiopians, they'll say, well, we didn't expect any coupon or interest payments, but we did it because of the love of the homeland, right? I'm not sure if Ghana could do that, to be honest. But the Ethiopian, the bishop, identity, is so strong, the cultural identity. In some ways, I think Ethiopia probably mimics Israel in terms of that cultural identity, right? And I'm not sure why we're not using that example to other countries to say, well, what are you doing to engage your diaspora to support this development project? Because one could argue with electricity, you do a net present net present value of that because everybody needs electricity. Everybody needs electrons. Cash flows are going to come in. I don't know why we're not using that example as a case study. Science and innovation. We for every challenge, I said there's an opportunity. I mentioned about India. It's now the #1 producer of vaccines. Companies like Dr. Reddy, Ranbaxy. These are companies that make OTC, over-the-counter medications. There's been some challenges with youth who are adolescents who unfortunately have died because of medicines from India. But why can't we make our medicines? Why are we turning to India, right? We have all these diaspora who are in pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and biotech. We need to utilize these diasporas to say, come home, we'll help you set up shop, we'll help you set up a free trade zone so that you can make this medicine. I talked about the year return. The year return was okay. I think the Ghanaian government missed an opportunity to encourage or look at its diaspora, or other people in the sub-region to say, hey, if you have a background in medical devices or pharma, we'll help you set up shop here. Imagine if the Ghanaian government had done that before COVID started. They could have got enough funding to, it takes 2 or 3 years to develop a vaccine manufacturing plant. It's billions of dollars, but could we make what is it called? We make the products that support the COVID was it REs or whatever they call it. There are things that we could have done, the Ghanaian government could have done. It's so important things from China or Germany. So diaspora engagement is there's some countries who have done a decent job. There are others that can learn from others. But there's plenty of people in the diaspora who have all these skills and talents. And I'll go back again to what I said a few minutes ago. If you're an embassy and consulate, think about all the embassies and consulates in DC. They're only there to really have passports renewed or get new passports and visas. They're doing a TEDx talk. Are they doing any type of from-back lunch so that they can identify who in their global diaspora have all these backgrounds? If you don't have a database of your own diaspora with all these skill sets, Morocco, they had a next devastating natural disaster. Do they know who in their global diaspora locally that can help? They can help get the word out so that they can use them as a it's a force multiplier, if you will. A force multiplier that's able to get quickly on a plane. There's in Northern Virginia, we have a crisis response unit who goes to different parts of the world. We have dogs, they have a team, and they go and they help. We should be doing that on a continent. We should have, each region should have like a disaster response team that quickly mobilizes and then go to different countries to help support that, right? We don't need the West for that. Why isn't the AU looking at this? So there's a lot of things that we can do that we're not doing. But when disaster strikes, we go to USA, we go to others to support. And and that's what I'll say about that. And in conclusion, I go back to challenges and opportunities. For every challenge, there is an opportunity. There's a business opportunity. I've got friends who are raising multi-million-dollar funds to do early stage investments. It's tough because of this market right now. The interest rates environment is not too kindly for people who are doing early stage investments. But I would say the continent now, compared to about 10 years ago, you're seeing a lot of opportunities people who have raised funding to deploy capital in a rate that I haven't seen before. I mean, Africa, I think, 2 years ago, prior to this, capital markets is the extraction or the contraction of the capital markets. I think the highest, I think it was 2022, that Africa raised about $5 billion, including not only equity, but also debt. But if you look at Africa compared to Israel, Israel raised about 6 billion, right? So even though we raised the most amount ever, if you look at Africa compared to Israel, it's a small drop in the bucket. But have we done a decent job compared to where we were a decade ago? I would say yes, right? So diaspora engagement is important. The fact that POTUS, President of the United States, has an executive order for diaspora engagement, it speaks volumes. He understands that the diaspora can be used as a force multiplier in lieu of the traditional development arms. And I look forward to discussing more with you guys all. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Simmonds. Yeah, it's fascinating how this technology kind of affect the way you perceive the world. There are people I haven't met, but that I see almost every month in the year or so that we've been doing these. Steve Shara from Malawi, Professor Shara, thank you for joining us again. Dr. Dodu in West Africa, who spoke a few months ago, thank you again for joining us. So we have regulars. You can only see a fraction of the number here on the screen here of all of those who joined, but it's interesting. We have this regular group of people who join us, as well as people who are joining us. Phil Molefe, my goodness. Let's go back to Africa now to hear from Asad Malik in Johannesburg. I believe you're in Johannesburg.
Yes.
He is the director of the Diaspora Project at the African Center for the Study of the United States at Wits University. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Powell. And first of all, please accept my sincerest apologies for being so tardy. I was giving a lecture in class, and it managed to go over a lot more than I expected. As Mr. Powell mentioned, and so let me say this: if I'm totally off the subject that you guys are speaking on, I apologize. But I wanted to speak briefly about some of the work that we're doing at the African Center for the Study of the United States, where I'm charged kind of with connecting African American institutions, organizations, and individuals to the continent of Africa. And we do this through three main action areas: community engagement, cultural exchange, and research and scholarship. As a part of my research with the center, I've been examining the burgeoning community of African-American residents residing in South Africa. And I'm so happy that the previous speaker touched on the year of the return, because this is something that I've been keenly interested in. As I was conducting my literature review for my project, I noticed that there's the dearth of scholarly articles on this rather new phenomenon of African Americans in significant numbers relocating to the continent. The movement has been given a title in mainstream media called Blaxit, right? New York Times, the LA Times, USA Today, all have written articles in the last several months on this phenomenon. So I argue that there's the old diaspora, the new diaspora, and now we have this phenomenon of the returning diaspora. Although it's small, it is my prediction that these numbers will continue to grow. In my research called Distant Cousins, African Americans Finding Home in South Africa, I explored the motivations behind African Americans choosing to relocate to South Africa. And one of the major themes that arose was what I like to define as this kind of racial uncertainty at home. I conducted 11 interviews with African Americans in South Africa, and each expressed having a feeling of growing uncertainty around their safety as African Americans, and that prompted them to seek abode in another country. I think it's important to note that 4 of the individuals were military veterans and 2 were former police officers. So this feeling of uncertainty was exacerbated during the Trump administration. And as the United States continues to kind of grapple with this current political climate, it is likely that more African Americans will seek abode in other countries, and many will find home on the African continent, which I think has some very important implications. As we define the old diaspora of descendants of enslaved Africans and the new diaspora as kind of recent immigrants to the United States, the returning diaspora highlights a divergence in the perception of the United States. Oftentimes we hear from our African brothers and sisters from the continent in the U.S. Of a certain perception of the U.S. as the land of democracy and freedom and opportunity. But many who are returning from the diaspora have grown disillusioned with the American system, and in many ways have awakened from this kind of American dream. Conversely, as these African Americans come to the continent, there's this kind of Wakandaization of the continent by returnees. Said differently, there's this kind of idealized version or vision of Africa that doesn't always match up with the conditions on the ground and the real life experiences of returnees once they have gotten into the continent. In Ghana right now, there has been some tension between the African American population in that country, which is about 5,000 people, and the native Ghanaians. Accusations of gentrification and the rising cost of living have been lodged against African Americans. And conversely, African Americans have accused Ghanaians of swindling them out of land purchases. So I think these scenarios bring up a few things, two points mainly. How can we better study and document the phenomenon of Blaxit from an academic perspective? And this includes examining the integration of these new diasporic communities into the larger communities in which they settle. We should learn more about the economic implications of African Americans residing in countries where their USD gives them more buying power than the locals. And secondly, how can the new diaspora be best integrated into the existing African American community in order to leverage their experiences and talents? So I kind of ran through my thoughts, but I will stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Malik. And indeed, when I was in Africa a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to a number of African Americans who have either retired there or moved there for professional reasons, for investment reasons. It is, as you point out, an interesting and growing force. Vice Chancellor Davis, I wonder if we can come back to you to get your reaction to what we've heard. And then I'm getting a lot of emails from people, and I know there are some people here with us in person here in Washington who want to join the conversation. But I wonder if you want to give your reaction first.
Well, first, my reaction is that I'm honored to be listening to these conversations. People have been doing this a lot longer than I have and been engaged and discussing issues, and all the issues that they discuss are real. It takes a certain type of person either to leave a country to go to another country or to return back to a country. It takes a certain kind of person to do that. Everybody's not, doesn't have the spirit, resiliency to do that. However, the most important thing is to be able to project yourself into the future. There are problems and there are challenges. The question becomes, when do you begin to address those problems and challenges? When do you begin to put a foot into the ground to make a difference? They talked about South Africa. When the Boers came in and and the Afrikaners took over in South Africa, that didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process that began to erode the country. We have to think in reverse of that. He mentioned the 2 generations of India. That did not happen overnight. It takes a process. It's unfortunate that we live in the US and we've gotten used to fast food and fast service and fast everything. And this TikTok generation doesn't help. Our attention span lasts 45 seconds to watch a video. But what we're talking about, building capacity, takes time. And Joe Madison, God rest his soul, who a person I used to listen to regularly here at XM, said the difference between a moment and a movement is commitment. How committed are you to making that change? And so as I listen to the intellectual discourse and the framing of it with an intellectual perspective, there's also the on-the-ground reality. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to make that change? How do we engage, and everybody will engage differently. And I'll just end on this note. As a poor kid from inner city Philadelphia, my parents believed that education was transformative. And that in fact, what we saw, a lot of the things that ailed my poor community in Philadelphia was miseducation. And so I've chosen to engage education, even if it's about education for entrepreneurial ventures, it's about education. But as I heard from Dr. Krista Jones, there are those who need to go into politics. There are those who need to invest. There are just those who need to connect. And I'll just mention one thing that I am very concerned about that was brought up as a positive, but just like every challenge is an opportunity, everything that we think has good can have a dark side. I am very concerned that countries in Africa do not become remittance countries. Very concerned about that because it doesn't allow for the infrastructure to develop. I've been in remittance countries. I spent time in Haiti. I spent time in Cuba. Those countries that are primarily funded by remittances don't develop. They stagnate. And then the best and the brightest go abroad and wind up sending their money back, but there's no development of infrastructure. And I tell you right now, I'm going to steal Brother Nee's ideal because I think I'm going to develop, and I know some of my people are listening to this right now back in Nigeria, and a diaspora engagement office where we're tracking the skill sets. How do we encourage those people to want to come back? How do we provide incentives for those people to build capacity on the continent, even if it's for a short period of time? I love what you said, because if there's something that happens, if there's a disaster that happens, who can you call in order to make that happen? If that's a start, just to have that database, whether it's the thing of Doctors Without Borders, where you have doctors that you can fly in, or engineers that you can fly in, or faculty members that you can fly in. And I'll extend that right now, and I'll end on this note, Brother Adam, is that particularly for those of you in the academic community, no matter where you are in the world, we're not setting up Wigwe University to compete with you. We're setting up Wigwe University to develop capacity in Nigeria, to develop capacity on the African continent. I'm not going to lie, because I'm very sensitive to what he said about you come in with US dollars. We're not going to pay you what American University is going to pay you. We just can't afford to. But I will tell you that the investment will pay off in ways that financial investments can. To be a part of making a difference is much more satisfying than making a few more dollars. So that's what's inside of my head right now.
Thank you. And we want to open the floor. First, a bit of explanation. Bob Wekesa has texted me that he is in a very noisy location with a lot of students. And so he thinks it might be better for us to moderate things from this continent. People have been emailing me. I see Ernie wants to make a remark, Richard America. So please, anyone who wants to join the discussion, please raise your hand. I'll be coming to you. Very good. Let's go first to Richard America, who wants to talk about his work with the Liberian diaspora in the United States. So, Richard America, the floor is yours.
Good morning, colleagues. Good to see you. This will be very brief. Our leader, Levi Zengai, is on the call. He is the president of the William Tolbert University, which is being created in Monrovia, and I'm helping. So he is the primary spokesman. We are hoping that the university, like all universities in Africa, will be a major educational asset, but also a driver of economic development, especially the business school, the engineering school, that they will be incubators of new businesses and therefore will create lots of new jobs, and much more. That's the summary. It's founded by the Liberian Baptist Association. So I believe there are many millions of Baptists in the United States, and we want to reach them, hoping that they will each donate $50 a year for the next 10 years. That would be a reasonable request, and it would matter greatly. That's it.
Thank you. You're beginning to echo what the Vice Chancellor said at the very beginning of this session about being able to link the diaspora to institutions in Africa. Those of you who are on the Zoom call, if you want to join the discussion, please use the raise your hand symbol at the bottom of your screen. Dr. Opeka, I see you raised your hand physically. So why don't I not wait for you to use the symbol? Dr. Opeka, if you can unmute yourself and join us. I think we have to make you a co-host to do that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Well, first of all, Ernest, it's great to catch up with you through this medium. I've been wondering where the hell you've been, so it's good to see you. I just want to share a few ideas. First and foremost, I've been most impressed. I'm glad I really joined this conversation. I think Professor Johnson, I was very interested in your presentation. I wanted to just make a slight modification to your perspective about the early days. I came into America in 1962. Actually, when I came here, Obama was just a year and 4 days old. And there was a tremendous tie between the Africans and the Black Americans. In fact, most of us rejected any attempt to distinguish us from the Black Americans, the attempt to give us special opportunities. We said, hell no. We're Black people like everybody else. And when you go back to all of the people who became leaders in Africa, there was this very strong tie between the African American and the diaspora African. New York in particular is where you had a complete integration of the Black movement in the late 60s, of the liberation struggle. It was all one effort. In fact, before he died a few weeks ago, the president of Namibia, Hage Geingob, always talked about New York. In fact, I was searching for his former professor, Wilbert Lemel, because he wanted him in Namibia. I think that, going back all these years, there are a few things that I'm preoccupied with. One of them is that the African American, the diaspora, we're all part of a global environment that is at best troubled. And I think that civilizations rise and fall, and the leadership of the world by essentially Western civilization poses a strategic problem at this point. And so if we pursue imitative development, it's like riding on the back seat of a tandem bicycle. So I think there's good reason to begin to question the world as it is being presently led by Western civilization. The other part of it is that I am preoccupied with the idea of how do we bring Africa and the diaspora to the global competitive edge. Literally, how do we use the agency, the collaboration between all arms of the African society to create a world that is more responsive to and more reflective of our intellectual cultural, ethical, moral prerogatives. That I think, in other words, I'm trying to see if we can lift the level of this global African society efforts to the next level. There's several areas I'm thinking about. For example, I'm presently at the very early stage of seeing if I can actually help develop a global R&D collaboration that connects African universities to global universities, beginning first of all with the African American universities. But essentially, so what happens is that innovation is open and intellectual at the university level. When it gets to the corporate level, it is then essentially taken out of the open market. It becomes intellectual property. And Africans are no longer part of that opportunity, even if they themselves have helped to teach and train the young scientists who later have become critical leaders in technology. I think also that given our own uncertainties at home, politically in particular, it is legitimate for any Black person anywhere in the world, any African, and I use African to mean the entire diaspora, to make an input into how we also address our socio-political shortcomings. It is delicate because of the fact that there are those who will say, well, you are not, you are not a Nigerian, you are not a Ghanaian, so you don't have a right to intervene. But no, you do have that right. And we need to intervene at all levels of access to create a more, a global environment that is more worthy of the human intellect. B, I think that we can help influence the world in a manner that will be more useful. And 3, I think we can engage really using our brain power to help create an Africa that is globally competitive in all areas. So that's just what I wanted to contribute.
Thank you, and I know that we have a couple of other speakers who want to join. I saw a hand go up by Mel Foote of the Constituency for Africa. Mel, thank you for joining us, and please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'm very happy to be here. Good to see some of these old people like Ernie Wilson. God, I hear about him every once in a while, but I haven't seen him. How you doing, Ernie?
I'm doing great,
Many others here who I think really is good. It's great to see them. So I was going to be quiet and just look at people, but I got to say something. It seemed to me that for those who travel and live in Africa, great. Hope it works out. I think it's good. But I think for Africa's sake, Africa need to better focus on creating the 6th region. Like I was in South Africa in 2013, I believe, when they launched the 6th region of Africa. And honestly, we've gone backward. We haven't gone forward. We've gone backward. We've gone backward in Africa. I look at the Africa Union mission here in Washington. I haven't been there for 5 years for a serious meeting about anything. Wow, what is this? So I think rather than to focus on attracting people to come to Africa, we'd be better served by transforming the African diaspora to be global. We need to educate Americans about Africa. We need to get Americans to better understand what's going on in Africa, and we need to help so they can help shape U.S. policy toward Africa. When I see people like Dana Banks on this call, I mean, it brings joy to my heart. People who actually work in the administration or worked in administration and can help transform the United States to better serve Africa. Africa needs its diaspora, but the diaspora need to be better engaged around Africa. The biggest problem with Black Americans is that we're too tribal. We spend our time over here trying to figure out, and we don't see ourselves as a global participant. So I just want to throw my card down. It's all for, it's well and great. I know people in Africa, Michael Darkison in South Africa, Forest Branch over in Namibia, and others who are doing very well. And that's great. They're adding to the economic and social development of Africa. But at the same time, we'd be better served to transform the African diaspora in a real kind of way. And that also speaks to Africa. Africa is so busy being tribal. You got 50-something countries in Africa. You really need about 5, you know? And so those who are sitting in Sierra Leone don't want to hear about Zimbabwe. Those in Ethiopia don't want to hear about Nigeria. You know, we got to do a whole lot to transform Africa to think more globally, because the world has become global. And in order for us to survive, we got to really figure out how to become a global African people. So I'll leave it there, and I hope I haven't just upset anybody. I just woke up really, and that's why I'm late. I woke up. Anyway, happy holidays, Easter for everybody, and look forward to continuing to participate.
Thanks, Val. I see another hand raised online from Jennifer Cook, the director of the Institute for African Studies at George Washington University, one of the partners in this series. Jennifer,
yeah,
good to see you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam. And like everyone else, it's really great to see Ernie Wilson, who I knew when I was much younger here in Washington, D.C. And great to hear kind of that history. My first job coming to Washington was working on the House Subcommittee on Africa during the anti-apartheid period on the sanctions bill. And kind of some of the heroes, the giants of the Congress at that time, and the Congressional Black Caucus, what they were able to do with folks like Randall Robinson and others was very energizing and exciting. And I wonder, and I turn to Mel as well on this, kind of, subsequently, you did have mobilization around debt, for example, debt relief. You had some mobilization around Sudan and the North-South conflict. But what is it that above, the trade and investment important, but is there something that politically is kind of, is big, a big continental issue that the Congressional Black Caucus and others can rally around? To my mind, one of the things, and President Hichilema of Zambia, Ruto of Kenya, and Akufo-Addo of Ghana recently wrote an op-ed on the global financial system and bringing better equity, the high cost of capital, the crippling burden of debt. And I wonder if that's one of those issues that is going to help investors. It's something that Africans and African leadership is looking for, more equitable global financial institutions that represent African views and African input, lower the cost of capital, which is almost unfairly high for African countries. And is it something, and I turn to folks like Mel and Dr. Wilson, that perhaps the Congressional Black Caucus can rally around? Because I haven't seen the kind of energy there, but correct me if I'm wrong, since maybe the early 2000s on African issues. So that's my question.
Interesting observation. Let's go to Africa once again. I see Dr. Dodu has her hand raised. If you can turn on your camera and join us, we'd love to see and hear your comments.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation, and I've listened with keen interest the contribution coming from the floor. I would like to make these few inputs. The Diaspora Africa engagement is laudable, especially when it comes to these engagements, the year of return and other things. They are very good initiatives that are ongoing. And also the disappointment, I heard from one of the speakers mentioning some of the disappointment from the diasporans. I think Africa is just like any other place. When you are going for the first time, you need an understanding of the culture of the people. So some element of cultural sensitivity, I believe, is important in managing some of the expectations. And also, I think a collaboration among African universities will be very important. This will help us to be better open to the outside world, because it will give us the common ground so that a lot of the issues that are being discussed will be across all institutions, across some of the African nations, instead of just being restricted to some particular areas. Also, on the engagement, I think that as the success of this diaspora engagement is highly dependent on having an equal input. Because if we have equal input on what is good for us, it will help create buy-ins from the people. But where the input is coming from somewhere else, more like the partnership isn't equal. So somebody knows what is good for you and proposing that this is good for you, so take it and work with it. At best, the people who are at the table, who discussed it and understood the reasons behind it, may carry it forward. But when they are no more there, then issues about continuity becomes a problem. So I think the engagement should go further and seek for input from the people, because the people know what is best for them, I believe. So this is just a bit that I want to add up to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dodo. And we have one more comment here at the table. Nabil Wekesa, we have not had any East African representation yet. So please, your comments.
Thank you so much. My first comment is from our previous session, Africa and Global Powers. While Africa engaged with global powers, promoting the public interest and the participation of civil society groups is very crucial, because this would make the partnerships to be holistic. It doesn't only reflect the interests of the political leadership, and it would have a long-term benefit to African citizens. That's my first comment. Coming to my question, when discussing about African diaspora, it's discussed more in terms of economics, their huge potential for African development. That's true. My question is, what do you think, the panelists, what do you think of the role of the African diaspora in contributing in conflict resolution, peace building, and the democratic governance in Africa? Because these are chronic problems in many parts of Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ernie Wilson, you indicated that you have a further comment. If you want to unmute your mic, you are unmuted. Please join.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that I would urge the group to think about a target that would be that we could actually implement coming out of our discussion today. And also the work that already you have been doing for a year, Adam, on this. And putting on my professor hat, I would like to support Dr. Dodo's recommendation that we find some way to link up African and diasporic universities as a concrete step forward. For all of the reasons that that have been raised, not the least of which would be a, how can I say, an authentic representation of Africa issues and concerns. So that would be my recommendation, Adam, as we move forward, and I know you're already heading in that direction, so I would just like to encourage our partners, both in the United States and in the diaspora and in Africa, to consider a concrete step to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernie. In the couple of minutes remaining, does anybody have a suggestion for a concrete step that we should be taking? Now, we're going to be looking at the Africa-US University Network becoming more formalized. And that's one concrete step. Any other suggestions or ideas? Oh, I see a hand in the back. Please, why don't you come and take a seat here so we can hear you?
I can stand up. Hello, everyone. I'm Fitzo. Okay, so you want me to be there? Hello, I'm Fitzo with a little bit of experience with the United Nations. In terms of concrete actions, I would like to suggest there's a future summit that's going to take place in May in Nairobi, which is hosted by the United Nations. So I was thinking, rather than the United States partnership with Africa, we can also come up with multilateral organizations like the United Nations. So we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which hasn't been, going so far in a good way, but we can also somehow, in a way, contribute by joining hands with this initiative. So my concrete suggestion would be maybe having a place, as a representative of the society, our organizations or anything like the university or whatever, we can also represent our thoughts so that it can be concretely taken forward.
Thank you. And we want to be.
I wanted to just add something about you spoke about the collaboration, right? Oh, yes.
Come here. There we go.
All right. So thank you very much. My name is Abdel Munsharu. I am a PhD student in African Studies at Harvard University. And my focus is public policy and development. I am originally from Cameroon. And when you ask the question about the collaboration, how that can be improved, as a student in African studies, a lot of the people that spoke earlier mentioned the fact that there is a need for exchange and education, right? I have learned a lot about Africa being in the United States. And most of the time, we usually take the fact that maybe we live in the continent for granted. So I feel like collaboration can be, reinforced in the way there is equal exchange. So because most of the time it's where the finance is coming from, the funding, that you have the more influence. And I also appreciate the fact that Mr. Davids, he said something about remittance, right? Like that doesn't develop countries and stuff like that. So at the university level, I think it's the opportunity to actually focus on the crucial issues of the continent and then have intellectuals that can actually be working on those issues, proposing things in the way they are not influenced by politics. So, and then from there, with a lot of people that are going to be around with a youth sensibilization, I think someone spoke about the grassroots movement or maybe civil society and things like that. I think, university can actually contribute by having that collaboration, identifying the issues. And also there is a mistake that we should not make. It's to just assume that everything should be generalized because we have a specific entities in Africa that have different realities. So the first thing can be to maybe identify the strength and then also take diagnostic of the issues and come with solutions with a decent exchange that is going to be equally, entertaining. So that's just what I can say in 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Yeah, but go.
Ernest.
Yes, I'm with the Breaking Barriers Project Institute. We work with Howard University alumni. It's a long story about how they got started. But we are in a position, and I'm going to talk further about that later, to develop a television project around the diaspora, and along with all the constituencies here, but also to do think tank work based on the money that we raise, based on the questions that we get through this process moving forward. So I'll be talking more with you about it. But that's what we, it's not university related, but it bypasses all the infrastructure. So it's like moving a PT boat as opposed to moving the Titanic in terms of creating relationships and solving problems on the basis of people who have already spent 50 years gaining skills as opposed to some other way.
May I be so bold as to just say something about that? Is that actually I think there are wonderful opportunities for collaboration with universities. I think that Howard University has a fine art program that has film production. Our university has a film production program. I think that better or worse students are often cheap labor and a practical experience. We have some wonderful documentary film makers on that. I would love to talk with you further about that. And your name being Davis helps. Thank you.
We have a project with Stokely Carmichael. We have, so we can, let's talk.
Let's talk.
Okay, I think we're gonna have two last comments. Let's go to, another one. Dr. Antoine Brown, you could turn on your camera and look like you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Adam, good to see you. Thank you for allowing me to say something. I just wanted to say information as always has been great. I think it's my third or fourth throughout the series, so I appreciate the information. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Antoine Brown. I'm the Director of African Affairs for the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives for the state of Maryland. And every time I get to be able to listen and learn, it's important to me because my appointment to help the African diaspora in Maryland has been something to learn and something I look forward to doing throughout these next 4 years. I see Mr. Melvin Foot on the line. Say hello. I think that was the first person I talked to when I got here, so it's good to see you, sir. And Adam, I just once again can't wait to talk to you about moving forward when we get a chance. So I just wanted to introduce myself and say hello.
Very good. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to working with you and your colleagues in Maryland in what you might have heard before, subnational initiatives. Peter Waldon, you're next.
Thank you, Adam. I've been taking part to some degree in this forum for about a year and have been extraordinarily impressed with the direction that it's going. Excuse me. But what I wanted to comment on was, and I apologize because I don't remember the name, the last person who spoke from George Washington University just a few people ago, who talked about Capitol Hill, or actually the Congressional Black Caucus, and the importance of building relationships there. And you mentioned the early involvement with the Sudan and the Arab North and the Janjaweed and the Animists and Krista South. I was working for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee as a senior staffer at the time. And I was the one that went to the CBC and convinced them to get involved because they weren't. This massacre, the slaughter, genocide, actual genocide, had been going on for some months, and the CBC was doing nothing about it. There were some individual members that were, but as an organization, it was doing nothing. And I'm grateful that I had enough relationships there that they got off the dime and started doing things. But it shouldn't have taken a 50-year-old white Jewish guy to convince the CBC to step in when that kind of thing is going on. Anyway, my compliments again to this body. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are just about actually, we're a couple of minutes over our scheduled end, but we have one more speaker at the table. If you could please offer your comment or question.
Hello, good morning. My name is Malik. I'm a graduate student at USC in public diplomacy. And I was really happy to hear consistently about the new diaspora, because that's where I fall under. And just coming recently from Nigeria and being a Cameroonian American, and hearing this conversation over and over again, my comments are about concrete examples to engage the new diaspora in a way that can be innovative, because I feel that a number of diasporans in that age bracket do want to engage, but don't necessarily know if they have a voice if it's not centered around something having to do with government. So I would like us to think about ways that we can include them, whether it be the private sector, the creative sector, because there is intersections. And I would like that to be something that would be a deliverable to come out of this forum. Thank you.
Thank you. And as I said, we were a few minutes over our scheduled end. I don't know if we can bring in Bob Wekesa again from South Africa. He did text that he was in a very noisy place, so perhaps we should
Right.
if I can shout over students.
No, thanks. I think being in a student center, you don't know whether to raise your voice too high or to just talk moderately. But thanks, colleagues, and thanks everybody for staying the course. I literally was putting my ear on the computer to just get everything. And I suppose the discussions have, towards the end, actually took a turn for an action plan. I think that's the whole issue of agency that featured quite prominently in the earlier part of today's session. And it looks like our work is cut out for us. And I suppose it's not just us who have been hosting these sessions. That's University of Southern California, WITS, Howard, and Public Diplomacy Council, but all of us who are on this call and many others who are of like mind. And my apologies, I think even though we might blame an agency here called ESCOM, which is the power utility, I think they are very efficient in their load shedding schedules. But overall, I think we have our next steps, and I'm certain that we'll put our heads together and come up with an action plan, a tangible way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for all of your work on this series and on this program to bring us to where we are today, which is in this series, I think, well beyond where we expected to be. But now with Diaspora, I think that we have our work cut out for us, and we have some specific challenges to raise today. I want to thank everyone who joined us here in person and everyone who joined online. We look forward to seeing you again on April 22nd, when we again will convene, this time on the subject of freedom of expression in Africa, looking forward to World Press Freedom Day the following week. So until then, again, my thanks, and we are adjourned. Thank you.